War was not a new concept to the people of the galaxy. Every few decades a conflict would spring up between different factions. Most of the time they would end with no real change to the status quo. When humanity entered the galactic scene, they were met with resistance. Their neighboring factions saw the threat a species like humanity could pose and moved to crush them before they could expand. Unfortunately for them, they were met by a steel wall. Humanity managed to hold their borders, but to everyone's shock they didn't push into their aggressors' territory. Instead they sued for peace, bringing stability to their region of space. A century passed, and humanity stuck to their policy of isolation, their only interaction with the outside being minor trade deals. From the outside it appeared that their faction was simply surviving, but in reality they were thriving. Unbeknownst to the wider galaxy, the humans had created an extensive information network, gathering intel on everything from military buildup to commercial trade agreements. Because of this network, humanity saw the signs of the galactic-wide war that was brewing. Fleets were built deep within their sphere of influence, weapons developed, tested and distributed, armies trained, armed, and positioned. Votes were held on humanity's responsibilities when the war started, and with little disagreement, the decision was to stay neutral. When the war started, no one could have guessed how quickly it got out of hand. Entire systems were burned, species were wiped out or enslaved, but still humanity remained silent. A neighboring race who hadn't attacked the humans when they rose to the stars, mostly due to their own relative weakness, approached the Human Council and requested a defensive alliance. In exchange, they would give the humans more favorable terms in their trading. The debates were short, and soon the two factions were allied. Seeing this, many other small, weaker factions asked for the same alliance. To their surprise, the humans agreed, but they added a new term for the alliance. Humanity would gain possession of a single system in each faction's territory to build a military base. Each system would possess a fleet, an army detachment, and a star base. It was one of these star bases that inevitably dragged humanity into the conflict. The war had been raging for nearly 70 years when one of the more aggressive factions, in need of raw resources, looked to one of humanity's allies as a target for invasion and conquest. Seeing the only real military force in the region being confined to a single system, not caring that the makeup and configuration of the forces there being completely different from the rest of the forces in the area, they launched a surprise attack. It was early in the artificial day-night cycle for the human forces when the attack began. Thousands of fighter crafts and long-range orbital insertion pods flooded the battle space. Fast attack bombers striking the warships and starbase, while their fighters and insertion pods raided the planet below. At first it seemed that the human fleet was doomed, caught unaware as it was. But the sturdy warships held, their crews rushing to their battle stations. General quarters sounded across the fleet. Fighters were scrambled, planetary defense batteries spitting anti-aircraft fire into the skies. The forces that landed on the planet's surface were swiftly met by the defenders. To the invaders it seemed that their surprise attack had failed. Then they noticed the state of half-dress of many of their opponents. They had surprised the enemy, but they'd responded too swiftly. Then they no longer saw their air support performing their attack runs. Instead they began to hear a horrible thunder, followed by a cracking sound that corresponded to entire lines of their forces being torn apart. The invaders' assault on the naval assets similarly turned for the worse. The enemy ships were far sturdier than expected. Their initial attack only led to the destruction of 2 of the capital ships. The rest were undocked and had been brought to full capacity. Their shields didn't even flicker when absorbing the ship-killer torpedoes, and worse, their point defense batteries began systematically dismantling the raider groups. A general retreat was called, the raider craft abandoning the forces on the planet as they made for jump distance, but they never seemed to reach it. The humans had activated some sort of gravity well extender, trapping the invading fleet, but worse, their flight had positioned them in the open, no longer restricting the Larg warship's weapons by risking friendly fire. The last thing many pilots saw was the particle discharge of the human ship's main batteries. Chalking it up to a simple failed raid, the invaders still moved on the weaker faction's territory, spreading deeper and raiding softer targets. The invaders' flagship received an impossible signal from their own border. An enemy fleet had punched through their defensive line and was making straight for their home system. Regretfully, the commander ordered his forces to withdraw back to their own territory until this strange threat was defeated. When they arrived to the system they'd called their species' home of origin, the only thing they found of the enemy was a single probe. After bringing it aboard his command ship, the commander was informed that the probe contained a message. It was once said, "To let the sleeping giant lay. But we are no longer just a mere giant, and you just woke the Titan." The commander, enraged, began to order all his forces back to the enemy front, no longer to raid, but to burn every inhabited system they found for this insult. Then, from his view screen that had been showing his home, he witnessed an explosion. His homework cracked, its own core bubbling up to the surface, coating the world in hellish magma. Before a second detonation tore the planet apart, fragments smashing into and through his fleet. The rest of the galaxy was shown a recording of this event. Every major faction receiving their own probe in their home systems, the same message played across the galaxy. "We're going back to sleep. Don't wake us up."